The rain hammered down on the cracked asphalt of Houston's industrial district, each drop slamming against the tin rooftops with a rhythmic violence that echoed through the empty streets. Puddles formed in potholes, reflecting the glow of flickering streetlights, creating an eerie, distorted mirror of the world above. Inside a modest apartment on the edge of the city, Sergeant Alex Turner, retired Army medic, single dad and survivor of far too many impossible situations, was tucking his 7-year-old son, Mason, into bed. The boy's small room smelled faintly of crayons, old books, and laundry detergent. Posters of fire trucks and space rockets adorned the walls, a chaotic but comforting tribute to a childhood Alex never wanted stolen by tragedy. "Daddy, do you have to go to work tomorrow?" Mason asked, his eyes wide in the dim light. Alex paused, adjusting the blanket over his son. The words hung heavier than he expected. Work tomorrow. That was vague enough to not alarm a child, but the reality was far from ordinary. "No, buddy, not tomorrow," he said, forcing a smile. "Tomorrow we have pancakes and maybe a little soccer in the park." Mason's face lit up, and Alex's chest ached with a mixture of love and guilt. He had promised his son stability after the chaos of losing Mason's mother years ago, yet life seemed to conspire against calm moments like this. Just as Alex leaned down to kiss Mason's forehead, his phone buzzed violently on the nightstand, cutting through the fragile quiet like a gunshot. He picked it up, eyes narrowing at the glowing screen. It was the emergency dispatcher, no caller ID, no introduction, just urgency. "Sergeant Turner, this is dispatch. We have a situation at the Gulfview refinery. Reports of a chemical leak. Up to 200 workers may be at risk. Hazmat-trained personnel closest to the site are being called in immediately. Can you respond?" Alex's heart skipped. His military instincts, long dormant since his honorable discharge, flared like coals reigniting in a fire. He could see it all in his mind's eye, the cloud of danger, the panic of civilians, the ticking clock that marked every second as potential death. A chemical leak wasn't just another emergency. It was a storm of invisible killers, a maze of smoke and poison with lives dangling by fragile threads. Mason stirred under the blanket. "Daddy, what's wrong?" Alex knelt beside him. "Nothing, buddy," he said, steadying his voice. "Just, some people need help. Remember how we talked about helping others even when it's scary?" Mason nodded slowly, eyes still wide with a mixture of fear and trust. "Be careful, Daddy," he whispered. Alex swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed him to leap into action, but a part of him froze. The memory of Iraq hit like a thunderclap, smoke choking the streets, shouts in the dark, men and women dying around him despite everything he'd tried. This was different, though. This wasn't a war zone overseas. This was his city, civilians, workers with families, lives that had nothing to do with war but were just as precious. By the time Alex dressed in his protective gear, rain plastered his hair to his forehead. He grabbed his medical kit, packed it with precision honed over years of combat, and checked his gas mask twice. Every item had a purpose, every movement deliberate. His apartment felt impossibly quiet now, Mason's small form watching from the doorway. "Come back," the boy whispered, the weight of those words pressing harder than any chemical exposure could. Alex nodded. "I will, I promise." Outside, the storm had turned the city streets into rivers. Headlights glinted off wet asphalt as Alex's truck cut through the rain. He drove fast but cautiously, aware that one wrong turn on slick roads could spell disaster before he even reached the refinery. Thoughts swirled. Evacuation plans, chemical properties, possible contamination, structural weaknesses. Every detail mattered. Lives depended on it. When he arrived, the scene was chaos incarnate. Emergency sirens pierced the storm, their wails bouncing off concrete walls and steel towers. Workers ran blindly, some coughing, others pointing frantically toward exits, while firefighters scrambled to contain the unknown. The air was thick with tension, thick enough to taste. A faint, acrid smell lingered, chemical, toxic, invisible, yet deadly. Alex's military-trained eyes scanned the scene, immediately categorizing threats, prioritizing victims, calculating escape routes. A supervisor stumbled toward him, dripping rainwater and panic. "Sergeant Turner, thank God, we don't know what we're dealing with. The alarms, the valves, it's—" Alex held up a hand, cutting him off. "I need the map of the facility. Show me where the workers are trapped, the storage tanks, the containment units. Now." The supervisor hesitated, overwhelmed, then fumbled for a clipboard. As Alex studied the diagram, a shiver ran down his spine. The refinery's layout was treacherous: tight corridors, elevated catwalks, multiple storage tanks in precarious proximity. One misstep, one breach, and the entire area could erupt in a catastrophe. A sudden scream tore through the storm, high-pitched and raw. A worker had slipped on the wet metal walkway, dangling dangerously over the edge of a catwalk. Without thinking, Alex bolted forward, boots skidding on steel grates, and grabbed the man's arm just in time. He hauled him to safety, drenched and gasping, adrenaline burning through every nerve. Breathing heavily, Alex assessed the crowd. Panic was infectious, but so was leadership. His voice cut sharply through the chaos. "Everyone stay low, evacuate toward the marked exits, follow my lead." Some hesitated, unsure, but most moved. His presence grounded them. For a moment, Alex felt the surreal clarity that had always followed him in battle, the moment when fear became a tool, when chaos became a map, and survival depended entirely on discipline and courage. Then a low rumble shook the building. Pipes groaned. Valves hissed like snakes awakening. The faint chemical odor suddenly thickened, burning in his nose. Alex's stomach dropped. One storage tank was destabilizing. He glanced at the evacuation routes. The easiest path was clear, but another wing of the refinery still held trapped workers. He had a choice: follow the safe path or risk everything to go after them. Mason's voice whispered in his mind, "Be careful, Daddy." Alex tightened his jaw. Memories of Iraq, of watching men die because someone hesitated, flashed before his eyes. He would not hesitate now, not when lives were on the line. He squared his shoulders, checked his gas mask, and stepped toward the unknown, ready to do what he had been trained to do, ready to fight for every life under his protection. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the refinery in a stark, white glare, casting long shadows across wet metal and trembling workers. Alex inhaled through his mask, feeling the weight of responsibility press down on him like never before. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm inside the refinery walls. And as he advanced, rain lashing against his gear, he knew this would be a test like no other. One that would demand every skill, every ounce of courage, and a heart strong enough to protect not just strangers, but a community, a city, a family he had yet to save. A scream erupted somewhere deeper in the refinery. Alex's pulse spiked. He moved faster, slipping into the corridors of danger, the storm of chemicals swirling around him, knowing with absolute certainty 200 lives were counting on him, and there was no room for failure. Alex Turner's boots clanged against the slick steel floors of the refinery, echoing through the vast, labyrinthine corridors like gunfire in an abandoned city. The acrid scent of chemicals stung his eyes and burned his lungs even through his mask, each breath a struggle, each step a battle against panic that threatened to slow him. Around him, workers scrambled in chaos, their faces pale, eyes wide, some coughing violently, some frozen in terror. Rainwater had seeped inside, pooling on the floors and turning already treacherous metal walkways into slick death traps. Alex's eyes, honed by years of combat, scanned the corridors with precision. This was not a drill. There were no safe zones, no backup, no way to call for reinforcements beyond what the fire department could send. Every second wasted could mean a life lost. His mind worked in a rhythm he knew well: assess, act, protect, survive. He signaled a group of panicked workers toward a safer corridor, his voice cutting sharply over alarms and the hiss of escaping chemicals. "Keep moving, single file, stay low." Alex barked, positioning himself at the front to guide them. A young engineer stumbled, slipping on the wet metal, and his screams echoed through the chamber. Alex dove, catching him before he fell into a shallow but chemical-laced pool below. The boy coughed violently, eyes watering, and Alex hauled him upright, slinging him over his shoulder like a soldier carrying a comrade through a firefight. Every movement was precise, controlled, yet every second brought new danger. Lightning flickered through the refinery's windows, casting grotesque shadows on the twisted pipes and storage tanks. Alex paused for a heartbeat, noting the instability of a nearby containment tank. The pressure gauges blinked erratically, and he recognized the warning signs immediately. If that tank ruptured, a chemical explosion could send shrapnel and lethal fumes through the entire section. He made a snap decision. Some workers had to be evacuated now. The rest would have to rely on him to clear the path. He shouted over the chaos, "Two groups. I'll take the inner wing, follow my lead, don't stray." The outer group hesitated, fear rooting them in place, but Alex's commanding presence, born of years commanding soldiers under fire, forced compliance. Slowly, carefully, they began moving toward a safer exit. Meanwhile, Alex led the inner wing deeper into the refinery, where the air grew thicker, the shadows longer, and the metallic groans of the building suggested imminent collapse. A sudden hiss made him freeze. A pipe had ruptured overhead, spraying a fine, invisible mist. He recognized it immediately from his training, a toxic chemical that could incapacitate in seconds. He gestured urgently to the trapped workers, directing them to cover their mouths and stay low. "Move now, keep moving." His own mask filtered most of it, but every step burned his lungs and made his eyes water. The refinery had become a cage of steel, smoke, and poison. Then from somewhere above, a deafening crash echoed. A massive section of scaffolding had collapsed. Dust and debris rained down, narrowly missing the group Alex led. He rolled a worker out of the way just in time, feeling the rush of adrenaline spike through him. The reality hit harder than any drill ever had. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation, and the 200 lives he had been tasked with protecting could vanish in an instant. A young woman froze near a side corridor, panic overtaking her. I can't," she stammered. Alex didn't hesitate. He grabbed her hand, squeezing firmly. "Yes, you can, follow me. Step by step, trust me." Her eyes met his, wide and trembling, and something passed between them, an unspoken promise that he would not fail. Together, they navigated the maze of walkways, ducking under pipes, leaping small gaps where debris had fallen, and sidestepping pools of corrosive liquid. Alex's military training guided his every action. Stay low, maintain momentum, minimize exposure. But the refinery seemed alive with danger, every turn revealing another hazard. Suddenly, a worker screamed from the distance. Alex's head snapped toward the sound. A man had fallen near a collapsing support beam, pinned halfway through a twisted steel lattice. The rest of the group froze, terror in their eyes. Without a second thought, Alex sprinted toward him, slithering under hanging pipes and through the mist. He reached the man, gripped his arms, and heaved with every ounce of strength, freeing him just as the beam groaned ominously and shifted. The man coughed, spluttering chemicals from his lungs, but Alex didn't pause. He turned to the group. "Keep moving, don't stop, we're almost there." But the refinery wasn't done testing him. A secondary hiss erupted nearby, stronger this time, the invisible mist swirling like a snake ready to strike. Alex's eyes stung, his lungs screamed, but fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. He pulled out a small respirator from his pack and handed it to the worker beside him. "Use this. Cover your face. Don't take off your mask." Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Every second was an eternity, every heartbeat a gamble. Alex's mind ran on autopilot, checking structural integrity, gauging chemical spread, noting each worker's condition, plotting escape routes. It was a dance he had performed in war zones. Only this time the stakes were civilians, not soldiers, and every mistake could be permanent. Then he noticed it, a whole wing of the refinery still teeming with trapped workers. Their voices echoed through the corridors, desperate, fearful, calling out for help. The storm outside was nothing compared to the chaos inside, but Alex's resolve hardened. Memories of Iraq's firefights, of soldiers lost because someone hesitated, surged through him. He would not leave them behind. He motioned to his group. "Stay here, keep low, don't move an inch, I'll be right back." The workers' eyes were wide with fear and trust. "You'll come back," one whispered. Alex's jaw tightened. "I will, just stay safe, trust me." He advanced alone toward the trapped workers, each step a battle against the toxic haze. Every movement carried the risk of collapse, every breath a potential poison. Pipes hissed, metal groaned, and the ceiling above quivered. Yet he pressed on, guided by a clarity only honed under life-or-death situations. His hands found injured workers, lifting, supporting, directing them, his own strength nearly exhausted but his determination unyielding. Then a shudder ran through the building, louder and deeper than anything before. A large section of scaffolding twisted and fell with a deafening crash, sending a shower of sparks and chemical mist across his path. Alex dove, dragging a panicked worker to safety, coughing violently through his mask. He looked up. The structural integrity of the entire wing was failing. One wrong move could trap him, endanger the very lives he was trying to save. Lightning struck outside, illuminating the refinery in stark white flashes. Shadows danced across twisted metal and pools of chemical runoff. Alex felt his heart pound not with fear but with focus, every instinct sharpened, every thought on survival and protection. Ahead, the trapped workers huddled, paralyzed by fear. Alex raised his voice above the chaos. "I've got you, follow me, step by step, stay close, stay low." The first worker hesitated, eyes wide. Alex extended a hand. "Trust me, I will not let anything happen to you." Slowly they began to move, guided by his unwavering presence. But the refinery groaned like a wounded beast, warning him that time was running out. Behind every step lurked a hidden threat, a ruptured pipe, a failing walkway, a cloud of lethal fumes. And yet Alex pressed on. He had already risked himself for the first wave. Now the true test awaited, reaching the trapped inner wing and pulling every worker to safety, knowing full well that each second brought new danger. The storm outside raged on, but inside, Alex Turner became the calm at the center of chaos, a single man determined to defy the odds, to save lives when the world seemed determined to take them. And as he advanced, coughing, lungs burning, sweat mingling with rain and chemical residue, he realized the truth of it. This was no longer about heroism or duty, it was about survival. Every life, every second counted. Suddenly, a deafening roar split the refinery, followed by a burst of fire from a distant containment tank. Alex froze for just a heartbeat, chest tightening. The refinery was shifting, collapsing, alive with danger, and somewhere in the smoke, 200 lives still hung in the balance. The roar of the refinery's alarms was deafening, but Alex Turner barely registered it. His eyes were fixed on the inner wing where a trapped cluster of workers huddled, their faces pale and streaked with soot and chemical residue. The chemical mist hung thick in the air, curling like a living entity around pipes and catwalks, threatening to suffocate anyone who dared enter. Alex's lungs burned with every breath, his mask barely filtering the toxic fumes. Yet he pressed on. This was no longer about caution. It was about choice, the kind that haunted him from war zones half a world away. He reached the edge of the inner wing and stopped. Ahead, a maze of catwalks twisted like a metallic spiderweb. A ruptured pipe spewed deadly chemicals nearby, and the floor beneath him vibrated with stress, threatening to collapse. The only way to save the trapped workers was through that corridor, but each step was a gamble. One slip, one miscalculation, and they wouldn't just fail to be saved, they could all die. Alex's mind raced. In Iraq, he had faced ambushes, explosives, and firefights that seemed impossible to survive. But this was different. There were no rules, no retreat. Every life here was civilian, innocent, unsuspecting. His gaze flicked to Mason's face in memory, and the weight of responsibility slammed into him with brutal force. The inner voice he'd cultivated in battle, the voice that had kept soldiers alive, screamed, You go or they die. He tightened the straps of his respirator, adjusted his gloves, and stepped forward, every muscle in his body coiled with tension. As he moved, the metal groaned underfoot, and a sudden hiss from above made him duck instinctively. Toxic chemicals rained down in a fine mist, invisible but lethal. His mask was failing to fully filter it, his chest tightening with each inhale, but he pressed on, ignoring the pain. The first worker he reached was a middle-aged man pinned between a twisted beam and the side railing of the catwalk. The man's eyes were wide with terror, his breathing ragged. I can't move," he cried. Alex crouched low, placing a hand on the man's shoulder. "You can. I'll help you, step by step. I've got you." Using every ounce of strength left, Alex pried the beam just enough to free the man. Chemical mist clung to his hair and clothes. He coughed violently, but he was alive. Alex motioned for him to follow, then moved toward the next cluster of trapped workers. A woman screamed from above. Alex's head snapped up. One of the elevated platforms had begun to buckle, threatening to collapse entirely. Without hesitation, he vaulted onto a side beam, his boots scraping sparks from metal, and reached the panicked woman just as the platform gave a sickening shudder. Grabbing her arm, he pulled her toward safety, muscles screaming, lungs burning. Every second was agony, every move a calculated risk. Behind him, a low rumble signaled the worst. One of the storage tanks had begun to leak more aggressively. Pressure gauges swung wildly, warning of imminent explosion. The refinery seemed alive, groaning and twisting, daring him to retreat. Retreat was not an option. 200 lives were counting on him. Alex's eyes swept the inner wing. 4 workers remained trapped near a side corridor that had partially collapsed. The passage was tight, dangerous, and coated in chemical residue. Even entering it risked death. For a heartbeat, hesitation flickered through his mind. He could save the others, retreat, call for backup, and leave this last group to chance. But every instinct he'd honed in war screamed, "You go or they die." He inhaled sharply through his mask, ignoring the burning in his lungs, and moved. The metal catwalks groaned, the air thick with smoke and toxic mist. His hands found the first trapped worker, a young man with eyes wide and shaking hands. "I've got you," Alex said firmly. The man's fingers clutched at his arms, desperate for stability. With steady, precise movements, Alex pulled him free, guiding him toward the partial exit he had cleared for the others. 2 more workers were wedged against a twisted railing. The space was too narrow to maneuver, the chemicals too potent to linger. Alex dropped low, crawling forward, his gloves scraping metal and sparks. One worker screamed as a pipe rattled overhead. Alex shielded her with his own body, pulling her toward him. Every movement was a gamble, but he refused to fail. Then he froze. A sharp, metallic creak echoed above. The overhead catwalk had begun to bend under its own weight, a twisted skeleton of steel threatening to collapse. Alex's heart pounded in his ears. The last worker, a terrified woman, was still trapped beyond it, screaming for help. The distance between them was mere meters, but the risk was almost certain death. Alex weighed the choice in seconds: retreat and live, but leave her trapped, or risk everything and attempt the impossible rescue. Memories of soldiers pinned under fire in Iraq, pleading for help, surged through him. He could not leave her. Not now. Not ever. "Hold on," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Using every shred of strength, skill, and precision, Alex climbed onto the bending catwalk. His boots scraped sparks from the metal. The air was thick with chemical mist, each breath a gamble. The catwalk shuddered violently beneath him. He reached the trapped woman, grabbed her arm, and hauled her forward. She coughed, eyes wide with terror, but she followed his lead. The metal groaned ominously under their combined weight. Halfway across, a section of the catwalk twisted sharply, sending both of them skidding dangerously close to the edge. Alex's hand shot out, gripping the railing with fingers raw from the steel. He pulled the woman with him, inch by inch, heart hammering in rhythm with the groaning metal. Behind them, a hiss of chemicals surged from a ruptured pipe, and a wall of smoke and corrosive mist enveloped them. They reached the safer corridor, collapsing onto the floor in gasping, coughing relief. Alex's mask was saturated, his gloves shredded, his body trembling from the effort. Around him, the rescued workers looked up at him with awe and terror. Some wept. Some could not speak, but all of them were alive. Alex stood, his chest heaving. He surveyed the refinery's inner wing. Structural beams bent dangerously, chemicals hissed like angry serpents, and debris littered the floor. But he couldn't stop. There were still workers in other sections, and the refinery was collapsing section by section. He looked up at the massive storage tanks overhead, their gauges swinging dangerously, threatening to explode with a force that could flatten everything in the vicinity. Every instinct screamed at him, "Leave now, call it done, save yourself." But another memory, Mason's small voice, pleading eyes, anchored him. The thought of failure, of leaving anyone behind, was unbearable. Alex adjusted his mask, ignoring the searing pain in his lungs, and pressed onward. He led the small group of rescued workers toward a partial exit, but even as they moved, he knew the real challenge was ahead. Navigating deeper into the refinery, where the last trapped workers waited, where pipes hissed, catwalks threatened to collapse, and chemicals hung like invisible predators. The impossible choice had been made. Retreat was no longer an option. Every life mattered, every step was a test, and the refinery seemed determined to test him to the limit. Alex's hands shook, but his resolve did not. He had faced the impossible before, and he would do it again. Lightning struck the refinery's towers outside, casting stark, flickering shadows across twisted metal and hissing pipes. Alex inhaled through his mask, pain and determination coiling together in every fiber of his body. The storm outside was nothing compared to the inferno inside, and somewhere beyond the smoke, trapped and terrified, more lives waited for him. A scream pierced the thick chemical haze. Alex turned toward it, teeth gritted. Somewhere in the inner corridors, the next worker cried out, and Alex knew, without hesitation, what had to be done. He stepped forward, deeper into the refinery, into the smoke, into the danger, fully aware that each second could be his last. And as he disappeared into the inferno, the reality hit him harder than ever. This was no longer about heroism. It was about survival. Their survival. Alex Turner's boots clanged against the warped metal of the inner catwalks, every strike a reminder of the deadly calculus he had chosen to embrace. The chemical mist swirled around him, thick and toxic, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. His lungs burned with every breath, yet he moved forward with a singular purpose. The lives of the trapped workers depended on him. Each step required concentration, muscle memory, and a will of iron. One misstep, one crack of weakening metal, and death would claim not only him, but everyone he had promised to save. Ahead, the huddled group of workers stared at him with a mixture of hope and panic. Their faces were streaked with soot, fear etched into every line, eyes wide and glistening with sweat and rainwater. Alex crouched to their level, his voice cutting through the alarms and the hiss of chemicals like a lifeline. "Stay together. Follow me. Step by step. Don't look down, trust me." They nodded, trembling. He led them through the twisted corridors, ducking under pipes and leaping over chemical puddles that hissed and fumed with lethal intent. Every worker followed his lead, some crying silently, others coughing violently, but all alive so far. Alex's mind ran like a supercomputer, calculating the stability of catwalks, plotting the fastest route, and analyzing the structural integrity of every beam. He knew time was slipping away, and the refinery would not wait for them. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed from above. A support beam had collapsed in the distance, sending a cascade of sparks and metallic debris crashing to the floor. One worker, a young engineer, froze mid-step, terror paralyzing him. Without thinking, Alex lunged forward, pulling the man behind a steel girder just as shards of metal rained down around them. Sparks danced dangerously close to the chemical mist, and Alex's stomach knotted with the knowledge that a single spark could trigger disaster. "Move," he barked, voice sharp and commanding. "No stopping, I've got you." The group obeyed, shuffling forward, their trust in him absolute. Alex's mind flicked to Mason, his son, waiting at home, unaware of the storm his father faced. He clenched his fists. Every second he hesitated, every moment spent doubting himself, could cost lives. The weight of responsibility pressed down harder than any battle he had fought overseas. They reached a section of the refinery where the metal had warped dangerously under heat and stress. The catwalk twisted like a broken spine, and below it, the chemical mist pooled in thick, suffocating clouds. Alex scanned the area. The only way forward required crossing a section of the catwalk that seemed barely able to support a single person, much less a group of terrified workers. He crouched low, lowering himself onto the twisted metal. One at a time, follow my steps exactly. The first worker moved cautiously, his eyes darting to every shadow, every crack in the metal. Alex moved alongside him, guiding his weight, helping him balance and shielding him from sharp edges. The air was thick with smoke, and each breath burned his lungs, yet he pressed on, step by step, inch by inch. Halfway across, a scream pierced the chaos. A worker had slipped near a junction, teetering on the edge. Alex didn't hesitate. He lunged, catching the man by the arm, muscles screaming, fingers raw against slick steel. The man clung to him, coughing violently, eyes wide with terror. Alex hauled him back onto stable ground, gasping for air, knowing the refinery groaned around them as if aware of the lives hanging in the balance. "Keep moving," he shouted, voice hoarse but unwavering. "Almost there." They advanced slowly, carefully navigating the treacherous passageways, but Alex knew the worst was yet to come. A storage tank above them began to hiss violently, releasing a plume of chemical vapor. The heat radiated like fire, the smell acrid and suffocating. The metal beneath their feet quivered with stress, and the refinery groaned, a sound like a living creature in agony. Alex turned to the workers, his eyes meeting theirs. "Stay calm, keep your masks on, trust me, we are going to make it." Their eyes reflected raw fear, yet hope shone through as they clung to his words. He could see it in them, the desperate reliance on his courage, his training, and his instinct to survive. And for a fleeting moment, he allowed himself to remember Mason's small hands clutching his fingers that morning, whispering, "Be careful, Daddy." They reached the final corridor leading to a partial exit, but a new obstacle blocked their path. A beam had collapsed across the walkway, forming a jagged barrier. Chemicals pooled beneath, bubbling ominously. Alex's mind raced. He could attempt to lift it, risk his own life, or find an alternate route that could add precious minutes. Every second counted. Lives hung in the balance. Without hesitation, he dropped to the floor, gripping the beam. His muscles screamed as he lifted and twisted it just enough to create a passage. The workers crawled through, one by one, their trust absolute. Alex followed last, pulling the final worker across, his body trembling from exertion, lungs screaming for clean air. As they emerged into a slightly safer section, Alex took a moment to assess the group. Each worker was battered, coughing, eyes wide but alive. For a brief second, relief washed over him, but the refinery was far from done testing them. A deafening roar split the air. One of the storage tanks had ruptured, sending a cloud of chemical vapor into the facility. Flames licked the edges of the room, and metal groaned under the heat. Alex's stomach dropped. The refinery was a ticking time bomb, and they were still inside. "Everyone move," he shouted, pushing them forward. "Keep low, don't stop." They rushed toward the exit, lungs burning, hearts pounding. Chemicals hissed around them, a toxic mist that clung to every inch of skin and clothing. Sparks flew from exposed electrical wires, igniting small bursts of flame. The refinery groaned like a wounded beast, threatening collapse. Suddenly, a worker stumbled, his foot catching on debris. He fell, sliding dangerously close to the edge of a catwalk. Alex didn't think he reacted. He lunged, grabbing the man mid-fall, muscles straining, adrenaline coursing through every fiber of his being. The worker coughed violently, eyes wide, but he was alive. Alex's mask filtered what it could, but his lungs burned with every breath. He glanced around. The refinery's intersections were collapsing, flames dancing across warped metal, chemicals hissing in deadly clouds. He counted the workers, none missing. Yet the storm of danger was far from over. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and they would all be trapped. Lightning struck the refinery towers outside, illuminating the chaos in stark, flickering white. Alex's jaw tightened. This was no longer just a rescue mission. It was a battle against time, structural failure, and toxic exposure. Every step, every decision could mean life or death. He turned to the group. Almost there, one more section. Their faces reflected fear, exhaustion, and hope. They trusted him implicitly, and he would not betray that trust, not now, not ever. As they moved forward, a new hiss erupted nearby. A pipe had burst, sending a cloud of chemical vapor into their path. Alex gritted his teeth, inhaling sharply through his mask, muscles coiled for action. He would lead them through it, step by step, until every life in this wing of the refinery was accounted for. The storm outside raged, but inside, Alex Turner became the calm in the heart of chaos. A single father, a veteran, and a man determined to defy the odds. And as he pressed forward, his lungs screaming, sweat and chemical residue coating every inch of his body, he realized the truth he had always known. Courage was not the absence of fear. It was acting in spite of it. And in the depths of the refinery, with 200 lives counting on him, Alex Turner's courage would be tested like never before. The refinery groaned like a wounded animal, each metallic creak and hiss of chemicals, a warning that the structure might not survive the night. Alex Turner led the workers through the twisting corridors, his lungs burning with every breath through the chemical-laden air. Sweat and rainwater mixed with soot and chemical residue, streaking his face and clinging to his soaked uniform. Each step carried risk. Every movement demanded precision. One misstep could send them plummeting into the cloud of toxic fumes or worse, a collapsing section of catwalk. Ahead, the exit glimmered faintly through the smoke and haze, a beacon of survival, but reaching it was no simple task. A collapsed beam blocked the way, twisted like a jagged scar across the metal walkway. Chemicals pooled below, hissing like a predator ready to strike. Alex assessed the situation in seconds, muscles tensing. There was no time to think, only to act. He crouched, gripping the beam with raw strength, and with a mighty heave created just enough space for the workers to crawl through one by one. Each worker hesitated, fear rooting them in place, but Alex's voice cut through the haze, steady and commanding. "Go, one at a time. I've got you." The first few slipped through, crawling on hands and knees, sweat stinging their eyes. The chemical mist clung to their hair and clothing, stinging lungs, but Alex guided them, hands steady on shoulders, voice unwavering. Then a scream erupted from behind. A young man had tripped, teetering dangerously over the edge. Alex lunged instinctively, catching him mid-fall, muscles straining, heart hammering. The man coughed violently, eyes wide, but he was alive. Alex didn't pause. He turned to the remaining workers, leading them forward through the precarious passage, dodging falling debris and hissing chemical vapor. Sparks flew from exposed wires, igniting small flames that sizzled against the chemical mist, adding a new layer of danger. Each step demanded complete concentration, every heartbeat a gamble. A deafening roar echoed through the refinery. One of the storage tanks had begun to rupture violently, sending a toxic cloud billowing through the corridors. Alex's stomach dropped. Time was no longer measured in seconds. It was measured in heartbeats, each one potentially the last for someone under his protection. He grabbed a worker by the arm. "Stay low, keep moving." They shuffled forward, inhaling through their masks, eyes wide with fear. The metal beneath them groaned ominously, threatening to collapse under their combined weight. Alex counted heads constantly, ensuring no one lagged behind. His military training guided him through the chaos, every decision calculated, every step deliberate. Suddenly, a worker cried out. One of the catwalks above had given way, sending a cascade of sparks and debris down toward the group. Without hesitation, Alex shielded the worker with his own body, grabbing him and pulling him out of harm's way. His gloves were scorched, his uniform singed, and his lungs burned, but he refused to stop. Lives depended on him. The group reached a junction, but the path ahead was partially blocked by a fallen support beam. Chemicals pooled around it, hissing and frothing. Alex assessed the structure. With precise movement, he dropped low, sliding under the beam, then hoisted it just enough to allow the workers to follow. Each worker crawled through cautiously, eyes fixed on his movements, trust absolute. Halfway across, Alex noticed one of the workers struggling, a woman coughing violently, her mask compromised by the chemical exposure. Without hesitation, he removed his own respirator and handed it to her. "Use this. Breathe. Stay with me," he commanded. She obeyed, tears streaking her soot-streaked face, and Alex guided her forward. Behind them, the refinery continued to convulse, metal twisting and groaning under the heat and pressure. Sparks ignited small bursts of flame along the walls, smoke curling into the corridor, threatening to choke anyone who lingered. The smell of burning chemicals filled the air, stinging eyes and lungs. Alex's heart pounded, but his mind was razor-sharp, focused entirely on keeping everyone alive. Then from deeper within the refinery, a scream shattered the chaos. Alex's head snapped toward it. A young man had slipped near a damaged section of the catwalk, dangling precariously over the edge. Time slowed. Without a second thought, Alex sprinted forward, muscles coiled like springs, and grabbed him just as he began to fall. He hoisted the man to safety, chest heaving, body trembling from exertion. Every second felt like eternity. Alex glanced around. The last remaining workers were exhausted, coughing, eyes wide with terror. The exit was just ahead, but the refinery was collapsing section by section. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and the entire group could be trapped. He had to get them out now. "Almost there, keep moving, one step at a time," he shouted, his voice hoarse but resolute. They advanced, navigating the twisted metal and chemical hazards with painstaking care. Sparks danced dangerously close to puddles of chemicals, and the heat radiating from ruptured pipes made the corridor almost unbearable. Alex's gloves were scorched, uniform soaked, and every breath was agony, but he refused to show weakness. Fear was a luxury he could not afford. Suddenly, a beam above groaned loudly. Alex froze, then pushed the nearest worker forward, signaling the rest to move quickly. The beam twisted violently, but they managed to pass just in time. Alex followed, muscles trembling, lungs screaming for clean air. As they emerged into a slightly safer section, Alex's eyes scanned for the next challenge. The refinery was a maze of danger, and the intersections were still unstable. He could see the outline of another group of trapped workers in the distance, huddled near a partially collapsed wall. Alex's jaw tightened. He couldn't rest. Not yet. Not until every worker was out alive. He motioned for the group he had just guided to wait in the safe zone. "Stay here, don't move an inch. I'll be back for the others." The workers' eyes reflected trust and terror. "You'll come back," one whispered. Alex nodded, teeth gritted. "I will, just stay low, trust me." He advanced alone into the inner corridors, every step more dangerous than the last. Pipes hissed, catwalks creaked, and chemicals swirled like invisible predators. His body was exhausted, lungs burning, but adrenaline and training carried him forward. He reached the trapped workers, guiding them one by one toward the exit. A massive section of the refinery groaned violently. Sparks flew, chemicals hissed, and the air seemed to vibrate with imminent collapse. Alex's heart pounded. The exit was just ahead, but one wrong move could doom them all. He took a deep breath, steeling himself, and led the final workers through the perilous passage. They emerged into a slightly wider corridor, the exit just visible beyond a jagged pile of debris. Alex's muscles screamed, lungs burning, but he pressed on, lifting and guiding each worker with precision. Every second was agony, every step a gamble. Finally, they reached the doorway leading outside. The workers stumbled out, coughing, eyes wide with disbelief and relief. Alex followed, emerging last, drenched in sweat, rain, and chemical residue. His chest heaved, body trembling from exhaustion, lungs screaming for clean air. Around him, the refinery groaned, metal twisting and hissing, flames licking the edges of the structure. But every worker he had guided was alive. 200 lives, at least for this wing, were saved. Alex sank to his knees, coughing violently, gasping for air. Around him, the rescued workers looked on in awe and gratitude, tears streaming down soot-streaked faces. Some collapsed to the ground, shaking with relief. Others clutched at his arms, barely able to speak. Alex's eyes scanned the remaining structure. The refinery was far from safe, but this battle, this portion of it, was won. His body was battered, lungs burning, but his mind was clear. Every life mattered. Every step had counted. And the storm inside the refinery was far from over. Lightning split the sky outside, illuminating the refinery in stark white flashes. The building groaned under the strain, and Alex realized that his work was not done. Somewhere deeper, more lives were at risk, and he would not rest until every worker was safe. He took a deep breath, adjusting his mask and gloves, and prepared to move forward once again. The refinery had tested him, pushed him to his limits, but Alex Turner had proven one thing: courage was not the absence of fear, it was action in spite of it. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, more lives waited for him, clinging to hope as he plunged back into the inferno. The storm outside had eased slightly, but inside the refinery, chaos raged on like a living beast. Alex Turner's boots slipped on the slick, chemical-coated metal floors as he led the remaining workers deeper into the inner corridors. The air was thick with fumes that burned his lungs and stung his eyes, but he pushed forward, each step deliberate, each breath a battle. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest, yet his focus never wavered. 200 lives were counting on him, and retreat was not an option. Ahead, a jagged wall of twisted steel blocked the path to the final trapped workers. The collapse had been sudden, like the snap of a snapping branch, and debris littered the walkway. Chemicals pooled beneath, hissing and steaming, threatening to burn anyone who lingered. Alex scanned the structure, analyzing the weight distribution of beams, the rusted metal, the pressure points that could fail at any moment. Time was slipping, and the refinery seemed to sense the urgency, groaning and twisting under its own deadly weight. He knelt, gripping the jagged metal, and began to clear a passage, pulling pieces aside with strength honed from years of military service. Sparks flew as metal scraped against metal, the sound echoing like gunfire through the cavernous halls. Each movement was calculated, every breath a gamble. The workers behind him watched, fear etched into their faces, yet their trust was absolute. "Keep moving," Alex shouted, voice hoarse but commanding. "Follow me, one step at a time." One by one, the trapped workers crawled through the improvised passage, hands slick with chemicals and sweat, eyes wide with terror. Alex went last, muscles trembling, lungs burning. He guided each worker over slick surfaces, shielding them from sharp edges and falling debris. The refinery was a labyrinth of hazards, and the margin for error was non-existent. Suddenly, a deafening crash shook the corridor. A massive section of catwalk above them twisted and fell, sending sparks and debris cascading dangerously close. One worker froze, paralyzed by fear. Alex lunged, pulling him out of harm's way just in time. The metal groaned under the strain, and Alex knew the refinery could collapse entirely at any second. He glanced at the workers he had already rescued. They were coughing violently, eyes wide with fear but alive. One by one, they made it to a slightly safer section, where the floor was more stable and the air marginally clearer. Yet Alex knew this was temporary. The refinery's final section, the one holding the last workers, was still a death trap. A scream echoed from deeper within the facility. Alex's heart skipped a beat. The final workers were still trapped, their voices rising in terror. Time was no longer measured in minutes or seconds. It was measured in heartbeats, each one precious, each one potentially the last. He tightened the straps on his mask and adjusted his gloves. Every instinct screamed for caution, yet he advanced, muscles coiled for action. He reached the first worker, a young engineer pinned under a twisted beam. The man's eyes were wide with fear. I can't move," he stammered. Alex crouched low, placing a hand on the man's shoulder. "You can. I'll help you, step by step, trust me." With precise, powerful movements, Alex pried the beam just enough to free the man. Chemical mist swirled around them, burning eyes and lungs, but the engineer followed Alex's lead, crawling toward safety. One by one, he freed the remaining workers, his body trembling with exertion, lungs screaming for air. But the refinery was far from done testing him. A storage tank above hissed violently, leaking toxic fumes into the corridor. The heat radiating from nearby ruptured pipes made the metal floors almost unbearable to touch. Sparks ignited small fires along the walls, their flames licking dangerously close to chemical puddles. Every movement was a gamble, every breath a risk. Alex's mind raced. He had to get the workers out now or risk losing them all. He signaled them forward, guiding them through the maze of debris and twisted metal. One worker stumbled near a jagged edge. Without hesitation, Alex grabbed him, pulling him back onto stable ground. The man coughed violently, eyes wide with terror, but he survived. As they advanced, the refinery groaned louder, a sound like a living creature in agony. Beams twisted, metal buckled, and chemical mist surged from ruptured pipes. Alex's mask filtered what it could, but his lungs burned with every breath. Sweat, rain, and chemical residue coated his body, but he pressed on, muscles coiled, heart pounding. They reached a section where the floor had collapsed partially, leaving a gap that seemed impossible to cross. Alex assessed it. Jumping was too dangerous. The steel was slick, chemicals pooled below, and the workers were too weak to follow. He needed a solution. Dropping low, Alex used a metal beam as a bridge, inching across carefully. He motioned for the workers to follow, guiding them one by one. His hands gripped the beam with raw strength, his muscles trembling, but he refused to falter. Each worker crossed safely, and Alex followed last, heart hammering with exertion and fear. Once across, he noticed the last worker, a woman trapped near a twisted wall, coughing violently, eyes wide with terror. Alex moved toward her, ducking under hanging pipes, stepping carefully over debris. He reached her just as a section of ceiling groaned ominously. Without hesitation, he lifted her over the obstacle, shielding her with his body from falling debris. The group finally reached a partially cleared exit corridor. Alex counted heads. Everyone was alive. Every worker he had led through the inferno, every life he had touched, survived. Relief washed over him briefly, but the refinery was still a death trap. One misstep, one spark, one shift of the structure could claim them all. Lightning illuminated the twisted metal towers outside, flashing through cracks in the walls. Alex's chest heaved, body trembling, lungs on fire. He glanced at the workers. "Almost there. Keep moving, don't stop." They shuffled forward, coughing violently, faces streaked with soot and tears. Sparks flew dangerously close to chemical puddles, but Alex pressed on, guiding them with unwavering focus. Every second was agony, every movement a gamble, but each step brought them closer to safety. Finally, they emerged into a wider, more stable corridor. Outside, light filtered through the broken walls, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. Alex's muscles screamed, lungs burning, but he pressed forward, helping the workers to safety. One by one, they stumbled into a semi-secure area, coughing, exhausted, but alive. Alex collapsed onto the floor, gasping, body trembling, lungs screaming for clean air. Around him, the rescued workers stared in disbelief, some weeping, others clinging to him, gratitude and awe etched into their faces. 200 lives, at least for this section, had survived because of him. Yet Alex knew the refinery was still unstable. Flames licked metal towers, chemical fumes hissed like living predators, and the building groaned ominously. The final sections were still a death trap. He had risked everything to save these workers, and the cost to his own body was immense. He glanced at the sky outside, lightning flashing across the clouds. Mason's voice echoed in his mind, "Be careful, Daddy." Alex's jaw tightened. There was no time for relief. Lives were still at risk, and the storm inside the refinery was far from over. With a deep breath, he rose, adjusting his mask and gloves, muscles trembling with exhaustion. The final stretch awaited, and Alex Turner, single dad and veteran, would not leave anyone behind. Not now, not ever. The refinery seemed to tremble in anticipation of the next disaster, and Alex knew with absolute certainty. The real test was still ahead. And this time the stakes were higher than ever. The refinery groaned like a living, wounded creature. Metal twisted and bent under the heat, chemicals hissed in deadly clouds, and sparks ignited tiny explosions along the walls. Alex Turner's muscles screamed with exhaustion, lungs burning with every inhalation through the chemical-laden mask, but he pressed forward. Ahead lay the most treacherous section of the facility, the part that had already partially collapsed, where the last workers remained trapped, and where any misstep could mean instant death. The corridor narrowed, twisted beams forming jagged obstacles that blocked the path. Hissing chemicals pooled below, bubbling ominously. Sparks from exposed wiring sparked dangerously close to flammable puddles. The air was thick and heavy, burning lungs with every breath, and the heat radiated like fire from the damaged pipes. Alex's heart pounded, adrenaline and fear coiling through every nerve. He signaled the rescued workers to stay put. "Stay here, don't move an inch, I'll be right back." His voice was hoarse but unwavering. Some of them nodded, eyes wide with terror and trust. Alex turned toward the intersection, where the last group of trapped workers cried out for help. Their voices were raw, terrified, a haunting chorus that drove him forward. Alex stepped carefully, ducking under twisted metal, balancing on unstable beams, every muscle coiled for action. He reached the first worker pinned near a collapsed support beam. The man's eyes were wide, filled with fear. I can't move," he stammered. "Yes, you can," Alex said firmly, crouching low. "I've got you, step by step, trust me." With immense effort, Alex lifted the beam just enough to free the man, guiding him along the narrow corridor. Sparks flew around them, chemical mist stung their eyes, and the floor beneath groaned ominously. The worker coughed violently but moved forward, following Alex's lead. The next challenge came quickly. A section of catwalk above began to twist and buckle, threatening to collapse entirely. Flames licked along the exposed metal, sparks igniting pockets of chemical residue. Alex assessed the situation instantly. There was no alternative path. The workers would have to cross beneath the twisting catwalk. He dropped low, signaling the workers behind him to follow. One at a time, move fast but stay low. The first worker crawled through, eyes wide and trembling. Alex followed, his hands gripping the metal, muscles straining under the weight of exhaustion and tension. He reached the next trapped worker, a young woman coughing violently, eyes streaming tears from chemical exposure. Without hesitation, he removed his own respirator and handed it to her. "Use this. Breathe. Follow me." They advanced carefully, navigating jagged debris and unstable metal. Sparks ignited nearby chemical puddles, small flames flaring dangerously close. Alex's senses were stretched to the limit. Every sound, every vibration, every hiss of chemicals demanded his full attention. One slip, one miscalculation, and it could all end. Suddenly, a deafening crack echoed through the refinery. A massive beam overhead twisted violently, sending debris raining down around them. Alex lunged instinctively, shielding the woman with his own body. Sparks ignited the chemical mist, producing small bursts of fire. Alex gritted his teeth and pushed forward, pulling the woman and the other worker to safer ground. The last worker was trapped near a collapsed wall, barely visible through the smoke and chemical haze. Alex's muscles trembled with exertion, lungs screaming, vision blurred by sweat and mist, but he pressed on. He reached her and the smell of chemicals burned his nostrils. "I've got you, trust me. You're coming out of here," he said firmly. With a Herculean effort, Alex lifted the debris enough to free her, guiding her carefully across the unstable corridor. Sparks ignited around them, small fires flared dangerously close to puddles of chemicals, and the refinery groaned under the stress. Every step was a gamble. Every movement could be the last. Finally, they reached a slightly wider corridor leading toward the exit. Alex counted heads. Everyone was alive. Every worker he had rescued, every life he had touched had survived. Relief washed over him briefly, but he couldn't stop. The refinery was still unstable. Sections of the ceiling hung precariously, chemicals hissed, and the air was thick with lethal fumes. One wrong move could still trap them all. "Almost there," Alex shouted, voice hoarse but commanding. "Step by step, don't stop." They moved forward, coughing violently, faces streaked with soot and sweat. Sparks flew dangerously close to chemical puddles, and flames licked the edges of the twisted walls. Alex's hands guided them, his presence a lifeline, his body battered but unyielding. Each step brought them closer to survival, each heartbeat a testament to courage under fire. Then a massive rumble shook the refinery. The final section was collapsing. Metal twisted violently, sparks erupted everywhere, and chemical vapors swirled like deadly serpents. Alex's heart raced. They were so close to safety, but the path was being consumed by the refinery itself. Without hesitation, he grabbed the nearest worker and hauled him forward, then the next, pushing through the smoke and flames. One worker screamed as the floor beneath them creaked dangerously. Alex lunged, pulling him out of harm's way. Sparks ignited nearby chemical puddles, producing small explosions, but he didn't falter. At last, the exit was within reach. Sunlight flickered through the broken refinery walls, a beacon of hope in the inferno. One by one, the workers stumbled towards safety, coughing, eyes wide with disbelief, exhaustion, and relief. Alex followed, every step a battle against exhaustion, smoke, and pain. Finally, all the workers were out. Alex collapsed just inside the safer zone, gasping for air, body trembling. Around him, they looked on in awe and gratitude, some weeping, some clinging to him. 200 lives, at least for this intersection, had survived because of him. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the twisted towers of the refinery. The sound of collapsing metal echoed like distant thunder. Alex's chest heaved, lungs burning, muscles screaming, yet a profound sense of resolve settled over him. He had faced impossible odds, yet every life here had survived. For a moment, he allowed himself a deep, ragged breath. Then his gaze shifted back toward the refinery. The outer sections were still unstable. Sparks ignited pockets of chemicals, smoke swirled in thick clouds, and the sound of twisting metal reminded him that danger was still very real. He thought of Mason, his son, waiting at home, unaware of the chaos his father had faced. Alex's jaw tightened. He would not rest until every last life was accounted for. Exhausted, lungs burning, muscles trembling, he rose once more, adjusting his mask and gloves. The refinery had tested him, pushed him to the brink, but he would not leave anyone behind. The storm outside had passed, but inside, Alex Turner became the calm at the center of the inferno. A single father, a veteran, a man willing to risk everything for others. And as he prepared to venture back into the refinery's dying heart, he knew the truth he had always known. Courage was not the absence of fear, it was action in the face of it. The remaining lives still at risk called to him through the smoke, through the flames, through the chaos. And Alex Turner, battered, bloodied, and exhausted, answered without hesitation, stepping once again into the inferno. The refinery was a war zone, but Alex Turner didn't flinch. Sweat and chemical residue dripped from his uniform, lungs burned, and his body trembled from exhaustion. But the last workers were still trapped inside, and he refused to leave them behind. Every footstep was a gamble, every inhale a risk, yet his resolve was unshakable. His hands, blistered and raw, gripped the jagged metal of the inner catwalk as he navigated the treacherous corridors. Ahead, the remaining workers huddled near a collapsed support beam. Their faces were streaked with soot and tears, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. One man clutched a young colleague, shaking violently as chemicals hissed nearby. Alex's chest tightened. This was the moment he had trained for, not in a classroom but in war zones and in life, where split-second decisions determined survival. "I'm here," Alex called out, voice steady despite the roar of alarms and the hiss of chemicals. "You're not alone. Follow me. Step by step, trust me." The workers didn't hesitate. Trust anchored them in the storm, guiding their trembling bodies as Alex led them forward. The passage ahead was narrow, the floor warped, chemicals pooling dangerously on either side. Sparks erupted from exposed wires, igniting small bursts of flame. Every movement demanded focus, every decision calculated, every breath a test of endurance. Alex approached the first trapped worker, a young woman pinned beneath a twisted beam. "I've got you," he said firmly. He dropped to his knees, muscles straining, and with precise movements lifted the beam just enough for her to slip free. She coughed violently, eyes wide with terror, but she moved forward, following Alex's lead. Behind her, a man teetered on the edge of a collapsed catwalk. Alex lunged without hesitation, gripping him by the arm and hauling him to safety. Sparks flew dangerously close to chemical puddles, but Alex ignored the pain in his gloves, the burning in his lungs, and the exhaustion threatening to consume him. Lives were counting on his courage. The last two workers were trapped in a narrow corridor, debris blocking the way and chemicals swirling like smoke from a fire. Alex assessed the situation in seconds. Retreat was not an option. There was only one way forward, through the inferno itself. He lowered himself onto the floor, sliding under twisted metal and guiding the workers through the tight space. The chemical fumes burned their lungs, eyes watered, and the heat radiated like fire, but Alex moved with purpose. Step by step, inch by inch, he led them forward, his presence a lifeline in the chaos. Suddenly, a deafening crash shook the refinery. The ceiling above them groaned violently, sparks igniting chemical mist below. Alex's heart raced, but he didn't hesitate. He pushed the first worker forward, shielding the second with his body. Metal twisted, debris fell, and chemical fumes surged, but every worker followed him, inching closer to survival. Finally, they reached a slightly wider corridor leading to the exit. Alex counted heads, all accounted for. Relief washed over him briefly, but the refinery was still unstable. The air was thick with chemicals, smoke billowed from small fires, and metal groaned under the heat and strain. One wrong move could still trap them all. "Almost there," he shouted, voice hoarse but unwavering. "Step by step, don't stop." The workers stumbled forward, coughing violently, faces streaked with soot and tears. Alex guided them with steady hands, eyes scanning constantly for danger. Sparks erupted near chemical puddles, flames licked the walls, but step by step, they moved closer to safety. At last, sunlight pierced through the broken walls of the refinery. A gust of wind carried away the toxic mist for a brief moment, and the group emerged into a partially clear area. Alex collapsed onto the ground, chest heaving, lungs screaming for clean air. Around him, the workers stared in disbelief, and awe, some weeping, others clinging to him in gratitude. 200 lives, at least for this section, had survived because of him. Emergency crews arrived moments later, drawn by the alarms and the storm outside. Firefighters and paramedics rushed toward the survivors, leading them to safer zones, administering oxygen and attending to burns and chemical exposure. Alex remained on the ground, muscles trembling, body soaked in sweat, rain, and chemical residue. His respirator was caked with soot, gloves scorched, and every inch of his body ached, but he had done it. Every life he could save, he had saved. A firefighter approached him, hand extended. "You saved them all, every single one. We can't thank you enough." Alex shook his head, voice hoarse. "I didn't do it alone. They trusted me. That's what made it possible." Paramedics helped him to his feet, checking him for chemical exposure and exhaustion. Every movement was agony, but Alex refused to sit back and let the story end. He scanned the refinery one last time. The structure groaned and twisted, flames flickered dangerously, and smoke still billowed, but the workers he had rescued were safe. For now, that was enough. Mason's face flashed in his mind, small hands clutching his fingers, eyes wide with trust. "Be careful, Daddy." Alex smiled faintly, exhausted but relieved. He had kept that promise. As emergency crews worked to stabilize the refinery, news crews arrived, cameras rolling, capturing the aftermath. Reporters approached him, eyes wide with awe. "Are you the man who saved over 200 lives?" one asked. Alex nodded, voice barely above a whisper, just doing what had to be done. The workers he had saved gathered nearby, some embracing one another, others kneeling in gratitude before him. Tears streamed down faces streaked with soot, sweat, and relief. Each one alive, each one breathing, thanks to the courage of a single father and veteran who refused to leave anyone behind. Paramedics led Alex away for a medical checkup, monitoring his breathing, heart rate, and exposure levels. His body was battered, lungs raw, muscles trembling, but his spirit remained unbroken. Every life he had saved, every step he had taken through the inferno, had reaffirmed what he had always known. Courage was not the absence of fear, it was acting despite it. Outside, the sun broke through storm clouds, casting golden light over the damaged refinery. Emergency crews worked tirelessly, securing the structure, attending to survivors, and containing the chemical hazards. But in the midst of the chaos, one man stood apart, exhausted but resolute, knowing that the lives he had saved were more important than any recognition, any headline, any accolade. Alex Turner, single dad, veteran, and hero, had faced impossible odds and survived. But more importantly, he had ensured that 200 lives had another chance, a chance to go home to loved ones, to breathe freely, to continue living. As he was helped toward an ambulance, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The refinery had tested him, pushed him to the edge, and nearly claimed him, but he had prevailed. Every scream, every panic-stricken movement, every second of chaos had been a testament to courage, sacrifice, and determination. And somewhere in the quiet aftermath, Mason's small voice whispered in his mind, "You made it, Daddy." Alex smiled faintly, body trembling with exhaustion, heart full of relief. He had not just survived the refinery, he had triumphed over it. He had done more than rescue workers. He had honored the values instilled in him as a father, a veteran, and a human being. The refinery still smoked, still groaned, still threatened danger. But for those 200 lives, the storm was over. And Alex Turner walked away, battered, exhausted, but victorious. A single father who had stared death in the face and refused to blink.